The reason why certain parts of the Bible are read quickly, without in-depth context, while others are given enormous prominence. It's no coincidence. Over the centuries, much has been softened, reinterpreted, or simply ignored so that a specific truth does not take full shape in people's minds. If you have ever felt that the Bible hides more than it reveals when it comes to origin, lineage, and spiritual power, this content is for you. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and follow until the end, because today we're going to talk about a royal race mentioned in the scriptures, a sacred lineage that was born in Africa and whose role was diluted over time. In ancient times, when winds blew stories from distant lands and rivers sang songs of wisdom, the Bible, like a sacred scroll, unfolded its truths, not just in written words, but in lines of blood that flowed like ancient rivers. Under the starry sky, where constellations traced paths of eternal brilliance, the concept of sacred lineage emerged as the central pillar of the divine narrative. It was not just faith that sealed the pact with the Most High, but rather the current of life that pulsed from generation to generation, uniting heaven and earth. The ancestors, their skin bathed in the African sun, were like baobab trees, whose deep roots linked the present to the distant past. Drums resonated across the vast savanna, echoing the truth that the sacred was rooted in the flesh and spirit. Thus, the extensive genealogies, which many consider to be mere lists of names, were, in fact, the fabric that wove the destiny of the chosen ones. Each name was a beat of the cosmic drum, each generation a beat that held eternal promises and signs of the sacred. The chosen people, then, were not just a grouping of the faithful, but a royal lineage, a blessed race whose veins bore the seal of heaven. The patriarchs, with their beards white as storm clouds, were guardians of ancient secrets, each holding a key to the mysteries of the divine. It was through them that the power of the Creator was manifested, not only in blind obedience, but in the living inheritance that passed from father to son, from mother to daughter, like a river that never dries up. And so myth and history intertwined on the sacred pages, revealing that the Bible spoke of a truth older than time itself. Spiritual inheritance was not a gift given randomly, but a calling that resonated through the blood, a destiny that revealed itself in the flesh and bones. It was through this lineage, born in the fertile soil of Africa, that the sacred found its purest and most powerful expression. The omens were crystal clear, and signs of the sacred were everywhere. Through the eyes of the ancients, one could see the glow of a promise that stretched beyond the horizon. In the dance of flames around the night bonfires, in the shadows of the lions that passed silently across the plains, was the indication that this sacred lineage carried within it the spark of divine presence, destined to illuminate the world. And so in the deep silence of the night, as the stars bore witness, the truth of sacred lineage remained, like a burning torch, an unbreakable link between the Creator and mortal beings. A truth that did not fade with time, but that grew stronger with each generation, like iron that becomes stronger when forged in fire. In time immemorial, when the firmament was a dappled blanket of divine luminescence and the wind whispered ancient songs across the valleys and mountains, the African land vibrated with the energy of the sacred. Under the watchful eye of the sun, which bathed all creatures with its warmth, Africa stood as the primordial cradle of a lineage destined to carry the baton of eternity. It was a continent where the pulse of the earth reverberated with the beat of ancient hearts, and where the spirit of the ancients danced to the rhythm of the drums that echoed across the vastness. The lands of Cush, Mizraim, and Ethiopia, whose names were reverently whispered on sacred scrolls, were not mere footnotes in the great history of the world. They were, in fact, the foundations upon which towers of wisdom and power rose. Cush, with its rivers snaking like silver serpents, was a land where knowledge flowed like waters, overflowing the minds of its inhabitants. Mizraim, known for its monuments that touched the heavens, was a testament to human exploits in harmony with the divine, while Ethiopia, the land where the heavens kissed the earth, was a kingdom where the wisdom of the heavens was harvested like ripe fruit. These sacred lands were more than just dots on the map. They were portals to the divine, places where the veil between heaven and earth was thin as morning mist. The kings and queens who ruled these lands were not just earthly leaders, but priests and priestesses of a celestial order, guardians of secrets that were lost in the mists of time. They were the bearers of a spiritual heritage that preceded the tribes of Israel, a lineage that walked alongside the gods even before the first Hebrew patriarch was born under the stars of Canaan. Thus, when the Bible mentions these lands and their people, It not only records history, but celebrates the continuity of a spiritual lineage that has its deepest roots in African soil. These places, with their intertwined stories of grandeur and mystery, speak of an unbreakable connection with the Most High, an eternal dance of sacrifice and blessing, where the blood of the ancestors whispers secrets of power and purpose. In those days, the signs of the sacred were visible to all who had eyes to see. The migration of birds in the sky, the blossoming of trees at the right time, and the roar of storms that crossed the sky were read like open chapters of a divine book. African civilizations, with their rites and ceremonies, were therefore living expressions of a covenant that preceded writing itself, a dance of life that unfolded under the eternal constellations, mute witnesses of a promise that transcends time. Thus, as the centuries passed, the stories of Kush, Mizraim, and Ethiopia became intertwined with the sacred narrative, not as appendices, but as foundational pillars of the great divine tapestry. And even as new kingdoms rose and fell, the pulse of sacred lineage continued to pulse across the sands of time, uniting yesterday and tomorrow in an eternal embrace. For in Africa, the heart of the earth, the sacred has always found its home, and the echoes of this lineage still resonate today like a drum that never silences. In times when the stars told secrets to those who knew how to listen, and the mountains held memories of ancient ages, the saga of kings and priests resounded across savannas and deserts, rivers and forests. Under the immense starry mantle, Africa sang the song of its lineages, where blood was the tangible link that linked the human to the divine, the ephemeral to the eternal. In the sacred narrative, kings were not just figures of earthly power, but rather emanations of a heavenly will, anointed not just with oil, but with the very essence of the cosmos. Like the great baobab trees that stand imposingly, with roots that go deep into the earth, the priest-kings of old were rooted in the soil of a sacred lineage. They were the meeting point between the visible and the invisible, beings who walked the paths of the world of men while keeping their eyes turned to the heavens. In his veins ran not only the blood of his ancestors, but the living current of divine authority. They governed because they were chosen. They led because they were part of a spiritual current that had flowed since the beginning of time. In the lands of Kush, Mizraim, and Ethiopia, these figures were more than mortal. They were living symbols of the Creator's presence among humans. In cities where gold glittered in the sun and where drums told stories of infinity, these priest-kings were seen as bridges between worlds. Their crowns were forged not just from precious metals, but from ancient promises that echoed in the wind. Every decision they made was a dance between earthly duty and heavenly mandate, an expression of the sacred balance that sustained the order of the universe. The royal lineage, that golden chain that braided the destiny of the chosen ones, was not just a spiritual metaphor, but a living, pulsating reality. The divine blood that flowed through his veins was tangible proof of an ancient covenant, a pact that surpassed time and was established in the first words whispered by the Creator. Thus, the right to govern was not conquered, but inherited, passed from generation to generation like a drum that never lost its rhythm, like a river that never stopped flowing. These truly anointed leaders were guardians of mysteries and holders of power, not by their own strength but by the will of the sacred. They moved like shadows between the worlds, with steady steps and gazes that saw beyond the veil of reality. And in his hands, the scepter of power was also the shepherd's staff, guiding not only nations, but also souls towards the destiny traced by the stars. Thus, in the heart of Africa, where the sacred and the mundane intertwined like vines in the forest, the lineage of priest-kings stood as living testimony to an eternal promise. In the dance of time, their stories were told around campfires, in songs that resounded like thunder in the mountains and whispers in the valleys. And as the sun set and the moon rose, the flame of royal lineage continued to burn, immortal and inviolable, lighting the way for those who followed the call of blood and spirit. The truth of lineage was not a matter of choice, but of destiny, a destiny engraved in the stars and whispered by the wind. And so, even as the world changed and the times advanced, the essence of these sacred lineages remained unchanged, a perennial testament to the connection between heaven and earth, between the divine and the human. For in Africa, where life began, the sacred always found its place, and the royal lineage, like an eternal river, continued to flow, carrying with it the promise of a future touched by the hand of the Creator. In times when the sun and moon danced in an eternal cycle over the earth, when the winds of the savannas carried ancient secrets and the flames of night bonfires told stories of past ages, the essence of the sacred lineage began to metamorphose. crossing centuries like a river that finds new paths, the idea of a real race once rooted in the African land began to transform, to expand beyond the margins of time and space. It was the time of great encounters, when civilizations intertwined like vines in the forest, and the stories of one people merged with those of another. In this melting pot of cultures and beliefs, the lineage that once belonged to a specific group began to be seen in a new light, no longer confined by the boundaries of blood and soil, but open to all who sought the sacred. The narrative, previously woven with threads of African ancestry, began to reconfigure itself, its plots unfolding to encompass a broader and more universal understanding. However, this transformation was not the result of chance. The winds of change were driven by forces that wished to shape destiny, steering the currents of history for their own purposes. By stripping the lineage of its specific roots, the narrative became more malleable, easier to be guided by hands that sought to control the secrets of the ancients. The power that resided in the direct connection with the divine, in the heritage of blood that flowed like liquid gold through the rivers of Africa, was suddenly transformed into a metaphor, into a concept accessible to any heart that believed. And so what was sacred and specific became an abstract and universal idea, a dance of symbols that anyone could claim, but that few understood in their depth. Ancestry, once seen as a mantle of honor and responsibility, was diluted to avoid raising questions about origin and power. The spiritual legacy, which ran like vital sap in the veins of the chosen ones, was gently removed from its foundations, allowing new narratives to gain space and control of ancestral truth to be disputed in the arenas of the world. Yet, even as this transformation unfolded, the echo of true lineage remained, like a drum beating gently beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the strength that rested in the heart of Africa. Those who still heard the call of the ancestors knew that the sacred could not be completely erased or forgotten. The truth, like an eternal flame, continued to burn in the souls of those who remembered the ancient promise, a promise that could not be completely silenced by the voices of new times. For amid this new interpretation, the essence of the sacred lineage remained, stored in the recesses of ancestral memory, like gold hidden in the depths of the earth. Those who sought the true path knew that despite external changes, the connection with the divine could not be falsified or lost. The blood of the ancients still ran strong and true, and the dance of the sacred continued to resound, awaiting the day when its true melody would be heard again by all. So as the world turned and civilizations advanced, the sacred lineage, redefined but never destroyed, waited silently, ready for a rebirth that would bring to light the truth of its origin and destiny. For although the concept was transformed, the essence of the royal race, its power and purpose, remained unchanged, an invisible chain that still united heaven and earth, past and future, in an eternal dance of sacrifice and revelation. In the days when rivers whispered secrets beneath the vast sky, and mountains held memories of time immemorial, a new tide of forgetfulness began to rise. It was a time of interspersed shadows and lights, where the stories of the ancients, those engraved on stones and sung around campfires, began to fade under the weight of a new narrative. The visual and cultural erasure of sacred lineage began as a gentle mist that slowly obscured ancestral truths, until the vital connection to the African soil was almost lost among the sands of time. As the tides of history moved, the representation of biblical characters, those whose names were whispered reverently in every corner of the earth, began to change. African soil, cradle of sacred origins, it was replaced by distant scenes, lands of endless deserts and palaces that touched the heavens. The faces, previously shaped by the African sun and the dust of the savannah, were transformed, sculpted by hands that were unaware or chose to ignore the true origin of these sacred beings. And so, the lineage that had once been celebrated as a reflection of the divine on the African land came to be seen through a lens that distorted its true identity. The drums, which once told stories of courage and faith, now sounded muffled, almost inaudible. Visual erasure was not just a matter of misrepresentation, but a calculated move that aimed to disconnect the real race from its roots. It was as if a tree was stripped of its leaves and flowers, leaving it naked and defenseless against the winds of oblivion. This process of depersonalization served to weaken the powerful connection between the sacred and the African territory, transforming the lineage into an abstraction that floated without anchorage in the world. And yet, even as the world tried to rewrite its history, the voices of the ancestors did not fall silent. In every heartbeat of the descendants, in every song whispered at dusk, the truth of the lineage remained alive, like a fire that burns eternally. Those who still remembered the ancient days, when the sacred walked freely among men, kept the flame of memory burning. Stories passed down from generation to generation became shields against erasure, a protection against the wind of oblivion that swept the land. Thus, as the world changed and new images took the place of old ones, the essence of the royal lineage, although obscured, was not destroyed. The signs of the sacred were still present for those who knew where to look, hidden in the recesses of the earth and in the hearts of those who refused to forget. And as the stars continued to shine over the African expanse, like silent witnesses to an eternal truth, the promise of rebirth pulsed on the horizon. For in Africa, where the drum of time continues to beat, the sacred lineage patiently awaits its revelation. She awaits the day when the mask of oblivion will be removed and her true colors will shine once again, lighting the path for all who seek the sacred. Destiny, engraved in the stars and in the hearts of men, cannot be erased, and the royal lineage, like an eternal river, will continue to flow, carrying with it the promise of a future where truth and identity will finally meet. In the days when the sun rose over the golden savanna and the wind carried with it the murmur of ancient times, the truth of sacred lineage remained, like gold buried beneath the layers of the world. The Bible, this sacred scroll that crossed the ages, held in its pages not only stories of faith and miracles, but also the echoes of a lineage that had sprung from the heart of Africa. Between the lines, in the genealogies that many saw only as lists of names, in the ancestral maps that delineated lands of promise, the presence of the royal race pulsed, waiting for eyes that recognized it. The sacred narrative, with its roots deep in time immemorial, brought references to lands and peoples that could not be erased. Names like Cush, Mizraim, and Ethiopia were not mere adornments of a distant history, but pillars that supported the truth of a chosen lineage. These lands, rich in history and mysteries, held within their hearts the testimony of a power that transcends the changes of time. The maps of the Bible, when read carefully and reverently, reveal a route that leads back to sacred origins, to a cradle where eternity and the ephemeral met in the dance of creation. The systems of spiritual power, described in detail in the scriptures, are more than simple accounts of ancient societies. They are mirrors of a divine order that manifested itself through priest-kings, leaders whose authority was not merely political, but deeply spiritual. The royal lineage, this current that flowed since the first mornings of the world, did not dissipate in the winds of history. It was reinterpreted, molded to fit the narratives of the times, but it was never truly extinguished. Like iron that is forged, the essence of the royal race remained, awaiting the moment when its true form was once again revealed. Understanding this lineage does not require rewriting the Bible, but rather the courage to read it with new eyes, to allow the spirit of the ancients to whisper their secrets through the pages. It is a call for minds to open to the truths that have always been there, hidden in the shadows of words, waiting for those who dare to see beyond the veil. The rescue of this lineage is an act of connection with the past, a bridge that connects the present to the time of the ancestors, allowing the true essence of the real race to emerge, shine once again. As we look into the scriptures, it is necessary to recognize that the sacred lineage is not just a distant echo, but a living force that still pulses in the veins of many. She is a reminder that the connection with the divine was never lost, just dormant, waiting to be awakened by those who seek the path back to their origins. The eternal dance between the sacred and the earthly continues, and the truth, although obscured, has never been forgotten. So as the stars continue to shine above the African sky, silent guardians of the ancient promise, the truth of sacred lineage remains alive in the hearts of those who refuse to forget. For in the search for understanding, we find not only the history of a people, but the essence of a promise that transcends time, uniting heaven and earth in an eternal embrace. It is a truth that cannot be extinguished, a flame that cannot be extinguished, a river that continues to flow, carrying with it the hope of a future illuminated by the light of the sacred.